Well, hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Fourth View's Zooming In series. We're calling it Cars and COVID. We'll play on the cars and coffee shows that are usually going on this time of year. I'm Spencer.
And I'm Dylan.
And what better place to have a discussion about cars than here in the garage? You know, as a car guy, I think it's always a great time to chat about cars. But why now? Well, there's the obvious economic implications. The auto sector contributes about 3% of US GDP, over $500 billion annually. Last year, manufacturers employed 1 million people, dealers employed 2 million people. And then if you look at the number of indirect jobs that are involved around the auto sector, that balloons up to about 10 million people. But in addition to just being an important economic driver, cars are really at this interesting turning point that have been accelerated by the pandemic. 6 months ago, the latest buzzword was mobility. Everyone was thinking about how are we going to move people around, not necessarily how are we going to move them around in cars. Suddenly, all of that's changed. Now we've got people who are moving out of cities, working remotely, planning road trips instead of jumping on a plane, and the car itself seems a whole lot more relevant to a lot more people.
This discussion also ties in really well with our upcoming In Local We Trust series that's highlighting American manufacturing, the push towards onshoring, and ways in which consumer choices are impacting the local economy.
So today we've got a really exciting group of people here to talk about the auto sector, where it's at, what the future looks like, and particularly how it looks for the Millennial and the Gen Z consumer. We've got John McElroy, who's a veteran auto journalist and the host of TV's Autoline Detroit. We've got Tabetha Hammer, who's with Hagerty Insurance, the world's largest insurer of classic cars. And then we've got Jordan McGillis, who is a deputy director of policy over at the Institute for Energy Research. So a really wide-ranging and exciting group of people. Thank you so much all for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Indeed.
To kick it off, I think maybe we'll go to you, John, first. What's really changed in the auto world in the past couple of months? The first thing we think about are dealers and how that experience has changed, everything going virtual. But what else is going on kind of underneath the surface that maybe people haven't seen?
Well, this is one of the worst times in the automotive industry ever. The collapse came so fast all around the world, all at the same time, pretty much. Some places lagged before others, but here's the problem is production had to be shut down. Sales absolutely went down the toilet because people were not getting out to buy them. Meanwhile, automakers still have to spend billions of dollars. I mean, they just spend like crazy because it's so expensive to be in the automotive business. And we're not through this yet, not by a long shot, even though in the US and other places of the world, like China notably, we've seen car sales come back pretty strongly. They're still down some 30-35% compared to what they were before. And I'm pleased to see that retail sales have recovered somewhat, but I think it's going to be years for the industry to get back to where it was before the pandemic hit.
Well, and there's also talk about just like travel in general and how much of a consumer rental car companies were of the auto companies. Is that still shaking things up?
Very much so. You've got to remember that the daily rental companies like Enterprise, Hertz, Avis, they buy almost 2 million cars a year. They're not buying anything right now. Business travel has absolutely, well, not completely evaporated, but it's down substantially. It's got to be off 80 to 90%. Same goes for anything that's related to business travel right now. It's down substantially. And look at us right here, right now, doing all this remotely. We've all gotten used to doing this. People who didn't jump online and do virtual meetings before, now are getting to be old hands at getting the lighting right, getting the audio correct, getting the camera adjusted. And we're seeing a lot of businesses going, holy moly, we don't have to be flying people around the country or around the world to have meetings. We can do it this way. So I don't think that business travel is is going to recover to where it was before for a long time to come.
Yeah, I remember reading the headline about Hertz, I believe it was, saying that they've got about 500,000 cars right now, and they're looking for approval in bankruptcy to unload, 150,000 of them right off the bat.
Yeah, they've got, like you said, about 500,000 to get rid of. Here's an interesting little tidbit that most people don't know about the rental insurance or the car rental business. They don't make their money renting cars. They get their money selling cars. That's where all the profit is. All the rental does is pay for depreciation, insurance, and maintenance. They dump these cars once they hit around 30,000 miles. Typically, that's 6 to 8 months of use, and then boom, they're in the market. They go back in the market as, relatively low mileage, nearly new cars. There's a great market, or there had been up until the pandemic hit. That's all gone right now. So, I mean, everybody thinks of rental companies of renting the cars and that's how they make their money. No, it's by selling them as used cars where they make their money.
Interesting. Now, then jump over to Tabetha for a second here. You've got certainly a different take, if you will, on the auto industry, being involved with the classic car hobby at such a great level. I know you're currently the director of the Greenwich Concours, but you were previously involved with the company's efforts to engage a lot of youth in the collector car hobby. Obviously, those events aren't taking place right now. So how are you getting people involved in the car culture?
Yeah, well, I think it's not only about getting them involved, but it comes naturally to so many people as well. And while there are so many recreational events canceled, the one thing that we can all do safely from a socially distanced perspective is drive. And we are seeing people still out there enjoying their cars. Certainly a little bit different means. You're not having the large gatherings of cars and coffee, or of course the Concours and the car show world has really shut down, unfortunately so, but that doesn't stop people from driving. And I think that it does provide a different means right now where even on as things have been shut down, certainly after the stay-at-home orders have lifted, people are getting out and enjoying the roads, and there's not as many commuters on the road going back and forth to work. So us drivers who enjoy it for the enthusiast side are able to have a little bit more of a better experience with that, right? And I think that this kind of ties back to the whole idea of autonomous vehicles and mobility as a relative means that, that the idea of autonomous vehicles is to tighten up that traffic gap and lighten the number of commuters on the road, and kind of address some of those issues that I think all goes back to this idea that commuting is not driving. And when we are able to get out and truly enjoy the drive, that's where a lot of the enthusiasts come in. And that's what we're seeing right now. People are slow to get back to it in some regards in terms of groups like driving tours, but there are quite a few that are starting to pop back up now. And it's working within the means that we have to. The masks at the start, and anytime you stop for fuel, of course, masks and hand sanitizer and all of those things we should do in our daily drivers, but still getting out there and enjoying the open road.
Well, yeah, you kind of touched on something I think we're planning on bringing up in a bit, but let's dive into it right off the bat here. For years in kind of the public sphere, it seems like the perception has been that, you either have cars or have something else. Is this kind of the best example in real life that we're seeing where both can exist side by side?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is a really great point you make, and very relative. It from our Hagerty side, and our core business is insurance. That's what we like to say keeps the lights on, but we are an automotive brand, and the lifestyle around that. And we see a lot of younger enthusiasts searching for those fun to drive cars now. And especially the 80s, 90s, 2000s era cars. Makes sense. That's kind of what they grew up with. But it's that idea that you can have both. I think you're spot on. Uh-oh, did we lose you guys?
Did
I-
we
I
lose
think-
our hooks here?
I think they froze, but they'll be back.
They will be. John, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, no, it's great to be with all of you, really.
Indeed, it is. And Jordan, I don't know you well yet, but it's great to see you, and I'm interested to hear about your side.
Well, you know, you guys come from a very different perspective than I do on the automobiles. I've never considered myself an enthusiast and haven't owned a car for probably close to 10 years. But I will tell you, this current economic context and social context has completely turned my personal relationship with automobiles upside down. And I've quickly become interested in automobiles.
We can help you out with that. Welcome back, guys. Uh-oh, we can't hear you.
You might be muted.
Yep, got it.
There you go.
There we are.
Here we are. No, definitely, Jordan, it seems like that's kind of a common story now. A lot of people who had thought they had given up on the car, didn't think they had a need for it, are all of a sudden jumping back in. Are you seeing anything in the policy front or kind of like in the raw numbers of where that might be coming from?
Well, you know, there are some interesting long-term trends here, and a lot of things that have kind of fit together and have been accelerated by coronavirus. And you can look at the price data, not only on vehicles, but if you look to the price data on rents in big cities, we're seeing drops. And inevitably, that's going to lead to people buying more cars because they're actually leaving big cities right now, and for very good reasons, and gravitating to places that may provide more insulation from the virus and various other concerns they might have about big cities. And it's a good opportunity for me to just tell my personal story, which I think is quintessential for my generation. I was born in 1988, so right at the peak kind of the millennial years.
Same here.
And
Likewise. Good year, apparently.
Yeah, I guess.
and so we have come of age during the largest expansion of the economy in history. Things were going really well. And simultaneously, we've had this long era of low crime in big cities. So a lot of people in our demographic have gravitated towards cities that our parents didn't, and stayed there longer. My wife and I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 5 years, right in the heart of town on 14th Street. And then we moved to San Francisco. And in those environments, having an automobile would have been an additional challenge. It would not have made my life smoother. COVID comes around. Both of our companies went fully remote, and we immediately got rid of our lease, and we moved to Arizona, and we bought a car. So I'm now in an automobile for the first time in 10 years, and I've driven more in the last 5 weeks than I did in the last 5 years, I can guarantee you. And it provides that sense of security, and it provides that sense of confidence that people are looking for right now. But that runs right into our policies, which are still going to be subsidizing, and perhaps more than ever, public transit, which we know from the data creates some significant public health risks.
Do you think cities are starting to adapt to the future reality, or have they not really been able to focus on that yet? Are they still just getting through the task in front of them?
Well, with the decrease in commuting and the vehicle miles traveled so far down, what we've seen in New York City in particular, and in San Francisco as well, is an acceleration of converting streets into more like pedestrian throughways and just for bus streets. So there's this movement of taking back the streets from cars, and I'm seeing that increase. So these marquee cities of New York, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., I think that they're going to double down on their public policies. There are a lot of people that really want that and aren't thinking seriously about how that's going to challenge people's lives, who are perhaps a bit more concerned about being in those closely congested areas.
Yeah. Now, John, I'm curious, what are dealers saying out there on the front lines? Are they seeing new customers come in, or?
Yeah, like I said, retail sales have come back quite strongly. although as I pointed out earlier, they're down substantially. And that's what I think we're going to see in the auto industry, at least, is a sharp V-shaped recovery, but where only about 80% of it comes back very quickly. And we're going to be 20-25% short for, I think, years to come. But it's interesting to hear what Jordan, you're saying there. I wonder what's going to happen when we finally get a vaccine. You know, at some point, we're almost sure to get one. There's also some other really interesting things that are going on that automakers and suppliers are looking at right now of how do you sanitize or sterilize the interior of a car? You know, in hospital operating rooms, they use ultraviolet light. I didn't know this until COVID broke, but there's 3 different waves of ultraviolet light, what they call A, B, and C. A and B get through the atmosphere. We're bombarded with that, but we're able to stand up to it. Ultraviolet C kills just about everything. It will not kill us immediately, but if we were exposed to it over long periods of time, it would. But it will kill viruses. So one of the very simple things they're looking at doing is taking the dome light in a car and putting an ultraviolet C bulb in there that when you park the car, it flicks on, it kills everything inside the car. So Uber and Lyft companies are going to fabrics that are more easily cleaned in cars than, say, cloth or leather or things like that. There's also fabric coatings that you can put on that are somewhat repellent to viruses and things like that. So I think when it comes to public transportation, there's going to be solutions that will get people back into it. As far as dealers go, they're sanitizing everything. They're running ads of how they will deliver your car contactless. Nobody's going to touch it. There's far more online buying going on right now. You know, if you go to buy a new car, oh my gosh, all the paperwork that you got to go through and sign this and do that and the other thing. Now they're trying to transition to get all that done online, or as much of it as possible. And that's a couple of the reasons why we've seen relatively strong retail sales, or a resurgence of some retail sales, because customers are getting it in their heads that, oh, I can do so much of it online, and I don't even really have to go to the dealership. They'll deliver the car right to me without anybody really touching it. Or if there is a driver, they sanitize. You know, I test drive a whole bunch of cars. I probably test drive 100 cars a year. They dropped a couple of cars off for us to test drive today. They get out, they wipe everything down, you know, just so everybody knows it's going to be safe. Dealers are doing the same sort of thing.
Now, do you think this favors Tesla at all with their kind of direct-to-consumer model over the dealerships?
Yeah, and following that, I know Spencer's actually remarked about that a number of times where, wow, they're actually selling direct. How are the dealerships going to take this? They've been lobbying for years to stay in that spot. Like, how is that all going to play out?
Yeah, look, I mean, we all buy things online these days. Everything you can buy online. The auto industry, or the automotive retail part of the business, has been dragged kicking and screaming all the way. Tesla's been out in front of everybody on this by a wide margin. And so dealers who very much want to have people come to their store, and remember, they've bought primo real estate. They've put a million or multi-million-dollar facility on it. They want people in the store. So this whole COVID thing has changed a lot of the thinking. And the dealers who have been the most progressive about this, that is, enabling online buying, are the ones who have been the most successful.
Yeah. Now, Tabetha, I'm kind of curious about classic cars. Obviously, everyone thinks of the auctions as being the place to pick those up at. What's going on right now? Where are people buying the classic cars that they've been picking up over the past few months?
Yeah, you know, we really haven't seen a tremendous slowing of car buying. It might even be the opposite. People have a lot of time on their hands. They're perusing the internet, and they're coming across those good deals also from people who are just looking to offload some extra weight from their garage. You know, your platforms like Bring a Trailer are still doing extremely well. What a great concept there, and fun guys to begin with. But most of the sales, especially amongst a younger generation, are all done private sales, and a lot of it's social media, your Facebook Marketplace, your Craigslist, things like that. So this idea is, as even John is saying, of everything online. Now, then you have to do the in-person meet and looking at the cars and the transaction, but it's still a lot of online. As far as the auctions go, Bonham's auctions are one of our partners at Greenwich Concours. I was talking with Rupert Banner from there the other day, and he made a really interesting comment that I hadn't thought about. Asked him how business was going in light of all of the events being canceled. So many of these auction companies are tethered to events that now are canceled. And he says, well, when he came into the business, none of the auctions were done at events. That's a fairly recent thing. And he said, so it's kind of getting back to the basics for them as well. Now it's just all online. And you start to really open your audience as well to a broader group internationally. And just even like this, the Zoom aspect, right? People can tune in from all over. It's breaking down those barriers. So I think the car sales will continue, especially on the classic side, as in a different way, but I think we're going to continue to see a lot of strength in that.
Well, I'm also kind of curious too, because for the past, 5 to 10 years almost, it seems like there are so many Asian consumers getting into the classic car market who are coming here to the US buying cars, some of them taking them back over there. Has that international buyer shifted? Are there still people out there buying Ferraris? And even
people out there buying Ferraris, right? When you think about it on an annual basis, normal years, less than 3% of collector vehicle sales are done through auctions. Most of them are all private sales. And so a lot of that is still happening, and that will still happen internationally as well. Obviously, there are some challenges with transportation and the shipping side of it, just considering the shutdown of things, right? And we are, of course, seeing challenges of especially your top tier, where somebody's looking to have the vehicle inspected or those aspects before purchase. Just figuring out those logistics of people being able to get in, see the car, verify it, all of those. But again, it comes down to individuals as well, what somebody is okay with or how they are able to approach it. So it's shifting, but it's still happening.
I'm curious, Tabetha, did Bottoms or anyone kind of the auctioneers, are they giving somewhat of a time frame on when they think things might go kind of back to normal, quote unquote?
I don't really think they can speak to that, because so much of it is dependent on all of these other aspects that we're all looking to. The event side, I'm trying to plan events now, and it's a day by day aspect of, and state by state, right? What state has what regulations, and well, can we drive through this state or can we not? And so it's evolving every single day. And, I think there's going to be a little bit of basing it off of some of your larger events, like sporting events and concerts, and seeing what they're doing. The advantage that we have in the car world in one regard is most of our events are outside, with the exception of a lot of your auto shows that are in large complexes. The car shows are often all outside. So we have that going for us.
Yeah. Now I'm curious too, have you seen any shifts in where your buyers are at? Like you look at younger Millennial and Gen Zs, and one would presume that the younger people who are buying a higher end classic car might be in more of an urban center. Is that the case or not?
Yeah, it's interesting. And when I'm looking over here, I'm looking at my other computer screen. These home office setups are not always ideal. So I'm pulling from you guys, but I'm looking at my stats, so I'm sure I get it right. But 71% of our millennial policyholders have vehicles in a county that is at least considered 0.75% urban by the percentage of its population, right? So definitely amongst a younger generation, we're seeing that. For boomers, that percentage is 63% of the urbanization. So it's, I think millennials are looking for the fun aspects, right? They're looking for these cars. Jordan, to your point earlier of just moving out of the cities and now having a need for the car. Years ago, we did a study about teenage drivers, right? We all know the sayings of kids don't like cars and nobody's getting their driver's license now. And in our study, we really found that younger people are still interested in driving. They eventually do want a car, but there's all of these other life factors that are delaying that, right? So they're waiting longer to get married, to have families, that need for a car. They're living in larger cities with public transportation until once they decide to move out to a more rural area where they need transportation. And then from a college aspect, a lot of them can't have a vehicle on campus their first couple of years. So they're just delayed in getting that driver's license, ultimately then needing a car to drive.
Well, on that point, the trope of millennials hating cars, and we got to distinguish between millennials and Gen Z, of course, but that trope emerged just after the financial crisis. And so our entire economy was upended, and the older millennials faced some significant hardships as they entered the workforce in a down cycle, and many of them, out of necessity, weren't making large capital expenditures and have pushed family development later into life. So it may have been more out of just cycles of the economy rather than a significant cultural change. Then we had, of course, Uber emerge, and then it compounded it and it accelerated that trend, I think.
Yeah, I think another thing just to throw in here, student debt. I mean, when I went to college, nobody borrowed money to go to school, or very few did. I was able to work my way through school. That's very rare today. Now you've got people of your generation coming out with boatloads of debt, and it's a real problem in terms of, a car company's hoping that they'll spend some money on a new car.
Yeah. Well, and that's even one of the considerations going into fall with all of the schools going online. If that does mean people are going to be staying home, doesn't mean that they also might opt for a less expensive college, something that's designed to be an online program, and then be able to get into that new car, which if they were off at school paying 50 grand a year, let's say for room and board, would have been out of the question.
Or even maybe if they can't afford it, they're just going to force to be leased or something like that because they're at home and they want to move, they want to go out.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. John, I happened to catch John on a call earlier today that some people were doing on the auto industry, and he asked a good question about whether people are kind of being pushed into different cars now. John, you want to maybe clarify that a little bit better?
What do you mean pushed into other cars?
Oh, just being pushed into cars now all of a sudden that, they find themselves in a spot where suddenly they need a car, regardless of whether they wanted a particular one or the financing options were a little bit different. They just had to go and buy something.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's an American phenomena. You don't see this, in Asia or Europe, or certainly not to the degree that you do here. But in the U.S., unless you're, as Jordan had mentioned earlier, in a New York or a San Francisco, which have got pretty good public transportation, you're going to be driving a car, or you're going to be riding in an Uber or Lyft. There's no two ways, or you're walking or you're riding a bicycle. I mean, the U.S. is still so automobile-centric that many people, whether they want to or not, have got to get a car.
Yeah. Now, do you think this whole situation changes what priorities the car companies are putting into the design of cars?
Not yet. And I say that because, to start from scratch and design, engineer, and develop a new car and bring it out to the market, that's at least a 3-year process. So even if right now, this year they said, we got to do things for COVID-19 going forward, it's not going to show up in the showrooms until late 2023, 2024. So they may be thinking about it, but like I said before, what if we get a virus and, within a year we're back to normal, in terms of people getting together and doing things like they used to. Do you really want to start designing all these things for maybe features that in a year or two people are not going to care about anymore? It's a real dilemma for the industry. And, it takes so long to retool and redesign cars. It's not like the clothing fashion business where they can change on a dime and, in 6 months totally change whatever kind of apparel that they're offering. Not so in the auto industry. If it's software driven, as Tesla has shown with its over-the-air updates, yeah, you can make quick changes. But if it involves tooling and stamping and welding and machining and that sort of stuff, you're talking a long time to be able to make a change.
And like looking at powertrains, do you think it accelerates the push towards electrification? I mean, nobody really cares when they get in an Uber or Lyft how that vehicle is powered like they would if they're actually making the purchase.
The laws are on the books in every major market in the world. Thou shalt build electric cars. There's no two ways about it. And no one has said, oh, there's COVID, we're going to change the law and make it easier for car companies. No one has done that. So automakers are on the hook. They have to do this. And we're seeing slowly increasing acceptance of electrics. And as automakers go from making what they used to call compliance cars, where automakers would think nobody's going to buy these things and we're just going to do it to meet the letter of the law and that's that. Those cars are going away, and we're starting to see the automakers, the non-Tesla automakers, get serious and learning from Tesla. The Ford Mustang Mach-E all-electric is a great example. It'll be out before the year's done. Looks good. Looks like it has brilliant performance, has over-the-air updates just like Tesla does. As we see traditional automakers come out with more and more vehicles like this, demand for electrics is only going to grow.
I know, Jordan, you were going to say something before. I didn't want to cut you off.
Well, I was wondering, John, what sort of features you think automakers are considering adding to vehicles or amending in this context? I haven't really thought about that point.
In terms of COVID or what?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I talked about a few of the things. How can you sterilize or sanitize the interior of a car? This applies more to ride sharing or ride hailing than it does with personal ownership. Because if I drive in my car and I'm the only one, I don't worry about, if I'm going to catch something because there's other people around. There are no people around. It's just me in the car. But when you start looking at ride hailing, ride sharing and the like, how can you quickly sanitize the interior of a car? Earlier we talked about the daily rental companies, Hertz, Avis Enterprises and the like. You'd be amazed at how much money they spend on cleaning cars. Somebody brings a car back, it's got to get washed inside and out. Well, now add another layer on top of that says you have to sterilize it as well. So companies in the industry, suppliers and automakers alike, Jordan, are looking at how do you quickly sterilize the interior of the car? And when it comes to vehicles that are being specifically designed for ride hailing, like what Waymo is doing or what GM Cruise is doing, autonomous electric vehicles with no driver in them whatsoever, they're doing an additional step. Do you put hand sanitizers by the doors? So as people are coming in and out of them, they can quickly wash their hands and have that additional layer of security to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Tabetha kind of alluded to this with the idea of separating the act of driving for enjoyment from commuting. And so do you see that finally coming into play even in new cars then?
No question about it. I mean, I'm an enthusiast. I'm a hardcore enthusiast. The faster I can drive, the happier I am in every situation within reason. But I also despise driving in stop and go traffic. I hate it. So I want a car that when there's an empty on-ramp or off-ramp, or it's a nice early morning and I'm out on a 2-lane road in the country, boom, nail it, go for it. But if I'm commuting back and forth to work, push the button and get out my cell phone and start going through, Facebook or Twitter or email or whatever. I don't want to drive in that situation. And we're very, very close to that becoming a reality. before 2025, we're going to have that capability within geofenced areas. Tesla's very close to that. GM Cruise is very close to that. In fact, Ford is coming out with its version of GM Cruise, or Super Cruise, excuse me. Hands-free driving within geofenced areas. The new F-150 pickup truck is going to have this, as well as the Mustang Mach-E that I talked about. And, just a couple of weeks ago, Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, people were asking her, with the COVID and all this, financial thing, cutting back on autonomy. And she was like, no. She says, people don't realize autonomy is way closer than most people realize.
Where do you think we'll see autonomous first? I actually heard the debate before of whether it would be on highways or whether it would be in dense urban areas and like parking garages.
Well, we've got to define what we're talking about. If you say, go into the showroom and buy a car and just tell it to go wherever you want in the United States, that's way past 2030. That's not right around the corner. What I'm talking about is things like GM's Super Cruise, where when you're on the highway and it's been mapped and you're in the geofenced area, you can set the cruise control and let go of the steering wheel. The car will just drive itself. Tesla started out that way, and then they got in a few accidents, killed a few people. I hate to put it so glibly, but that's what happened. And now they've got it back to where you have to keep your hands on the steering wheel. But, Elon Musk keeps talking about they're going to have full self-driving. It was supposed to be this year. Now things have been pushed back. It'll probably be next year. But we're going to have, autonomous ride sharing, probably in San Francisco, probably by GM Cruise, probably next year. It was supposed to be this year. COVID interrupted everything. But we'll probably see autonomous public ride hailing next year, commercial service.
Yeah. And that, of course, is what the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world have been waiting for, because they're unable to be profitable without that.
Exactly right.
And Tabetha, I was going to ask you to perhaps chime in. With a lot of your customers, what do you see them doing for their commute? Do they have a designated car? Is it that they're using public transit?
Yeah, I don't have specifics on that from our clientele, but a lot of them, and it's geographically based, right? Nobody wants to drive a car on a daily basis in and out of Manhattan. It's horrendous, right? And just like John said, it's frustrating, whether Manhattan or DC or San Francisco, any of these large cities. It's not what we drivers want to be doing with our time. But, a lot of them, and in fact, just thinking through some of my car friends here in New York City, they just have their fun to drive car that they're able to get out on the weekends. You also have kind of your ride share for the fun car world as well. So Hagerty has our drive share program that is basically Airbnb for collector vehicles. Or you have your clubs like Classic Car Club of Manhattan, kind of these membership-based organizations that you can still have your get out on the open road fun car, and maybe not have to rely on that daily transportation, or you commute via public transportation and still have that ability to go out and drive. We do see in that.
I think for the upscale demographic, that's going to become very appealing because those quick trips over to Europe from New York City aren't happening anymore. People are looking for a fun way to spend time and spend money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, would you say those are attracting a younger audience to the hobby, or is it just attracting kind of the same people in a different way?
Through our drive share program, I think it certainly is speaking to a younger demographic as well. So both sides. So you have a lot of your car owners, current car owners that are loving the platform because they can put their car on it and it's a revenue generator for them to then be able to buy their next dream car or their ultimate dream car. So it's a money maker for them. But it's also breaking down the barrier for younger people to be able to learn the type of vehicle that they want to eventually buy. We've seen a lot of scenarios where somebody will rent a BMW M3 on DriveShare or whatever it might be that they're experiencing, and then they actually go out and look for one to buy because they finally have that experience with it and they fall in love with it. So it's really breaking down the barriers, giving them access, and also providing a way for current collectors to maybe add to their fleet as well, have a little money maker from these as well.
Yeah. Now, you guys kind of talked a little bit about the move towards traveling by car. Has anyone seen any data on road trips coming up? I mean, obviously there's miles driven. Is there anything that we can point to for that?
Well, I know I'm eager to see that for this 4th of July weekend. I know that there were many tens of thousands of people that actually flew for the first time in the United States this past weekend, but I'm not sure about the vehicle miles traveled. I'm sure it's really, really high.
I haven't seen the specific statistics about it. I was having a conversation earlier about somebody referenced the increase of RV rentals over the last month, which would speak totally to those road trip family outings. So I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, and I was just going to say we do have a little bit of time left, but wanted to open up to the audience to ask any questions that they were thinking. I know there's been a little bit of questions about self-driving capabilities and things like that. But while some of that's rolling in, I wanted to ask Jordan. I wanted to go back to the question about it when we do go back to normal, quote unquote. Are you going to get rid of your car? And if so, are these kind of transit systems, the metro transit systems, because they've been asking for like money to stay afloat. So it kind of seems like they're expecting people to go back to normal when things are going back to normal. So like, how is that kind of interplaying together?
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as the transit agencies, I don't think they can seriously have that expectation that you described. The data that we have from epidemiologists is that this virus may be airborne at this point. It may be not even be fomite related. It might be just in our ambient air, and entering into an enclosed space with 45 strangers isn't going to be appealing to many people long after this particular pandemic ceases, because it's going to linger in our minds. Personally, and I think this is the case for a lot of people, it's really going to depend on the work situation. If remote work remains a norm, there's very little reason for me to take out a lease in a high cost of living area. But if we return to a circumstance in which the high paying jobs are in those densely packed places, I personally would consider moving back. And the more cost effective move is usually not to have a car if you live in the heart of one of those cities, because land is at such a premium. You can't park with confidence. It's costly, and also is in San Francisco, it's very risky because of the vandalism. So I would probably get rid of my vehicle if I were to move back to San Francisco.
But that's interesting with Tabetha's numbers, because I mean, over half of people who own collector cars are still in urban or in some kind of urban environment. So I found that really interesting.
Well, I would point out that those numbers probably include a lot of what we would call suburbs at 70%. So as you described, John described, most of America is entirely designed for cars. The top 100 cities by population in the US only contain about 20% of the population. So 80% of people live in suburbs or in rural areas. It's largely suburban. Even when we talk about urban, we're talking about places that are car dependent. We only have a handful of cities where it's realistic to live comfortably without a car. In those places, I think people will still flock because that's where the highest paying jobs are. But most Americans don't live in the heart of New York City.
Jordan, I got a question for you. What are city planners looking at? Because You look at New York City, they closed down Times Square. You can't drive through there anymore. The predictions were that it was going to be a disaster. It's been phenomenal. You can barely walk through Times Square, or pre-COVID at least, because it became such a popular place. It became such a way of, intermingling and being with people. And we're seeing other traffic calming applications being put in cities. I think Portland, Oregon was one of the real leaders in that regard. Do you see more of this happening around the country?
Definitely. 14th Street in New York City went car free, I believe, is one of the clearest examples of that. It's now solely for buses and probably bike lanes as well. But as I mentioned earlier, the decrease in vehicle miles traveled and decrease in commuting is giving an opportunity for cities and the residents of cities to kind of exert their influence over suburbanites who drive into the city. And I think that is only going to accelerate, because there is this, in times of crisis, there's an opportunity for anyone who has an agenda. And I think despite the drawbacks of increased money and increased reliance on public transit, there's an opportunity for that to see a lot more public investment.
Well, yeah, we do have one amusing question here. Can't resist talking about Elon Musk. Coming in, a panelist or attendees asking, is Tesla going to kick him out?
Kick out Elon?
Yeah.
They can't kick out Elon. He's got too much voting power. He'll vote them out of the company before they kick him out.
And he's got the gift of raising money.
This is why Tesla's still in business. Look, Tesla's been a public company for over a decade. It has never had a profitable year. Never. And the only reason it's still in business is that Elon has this uncanny ability to be able to go out and borrow more money, even though he's never made a profit for a full year. Look, I want to see the company survive. I think they've done tremendous stuff. But there's no question, Elon is a very special individual. What he's accomplished in his lifetime, oh my gosh, it's unreal. But the guy's a little bit kooky too, and to say the least. And Tesla would not be where it is today without Elon, and yet by the same token, it might even be farther ahead right now without him. So that's the dichotomy of an Elon Musk, who actually, in a way, very much reminds me of Henry Ford. They were both very driven, very entrepreneurial, but a little bit kooky.
Well, and even on that, like going back to Jordan, even the Bohr tunnel, maybe we could do more tunnels in cities to help with traffic.
Yeah, Jordan, what do you think of that? The Hyperloop.
Well, I asked Boston what they thought about the Big Dig.
It took forever. And went how far over budget?
Enormous eclipsing of that budget. But I think that that memory of the pain that came with it has receded for a lot of people. And I believe there's a park above it for a considerable portion, and people like it quite a bit.
Yeah. My only question about the Hyperloop, which I love in concept, being able to go 700 miles an hour, but in earthquake prone areas, I don't know if you'd get me in a tunnel in California, just, ever. Maybe New York, where you're boring through bedrock. Yeah, I'd feel safe in that, but not in any earthquake prone area.
Well, John, on Jay Leno's Garage, he was interviewing Elon, and he was saying the same thing. He's like, I don't know about this. And Musk was like, well, think of it this way. It's kind of like a storm. The closer you are to the eye, the calmer it is. So in fact, actually, it was funny how he was saying tunnels are safer than being on the ground, because that's actually like where you feel the effect most. So it was interesting how he was talking about it. It was effective. But anyway.
Yeah, no, he's going to have to do some convincing to get me in a tunnel in California.
Yeah. So I think maybe just to wrap up, I'm kind of curious to hear what each of you think will be some of the milestones going forward. what is it that the collector car hobby, that policymakers, or that the auto sector are looking for before they can say, hey, we're back to normal?
It's so hard to say right now. I mean, there are so many things up in the air and contingencies around all of that. I think the one thing that COVID has brought to light are some of the things that we probably should have been doing all along. That, we're talking about sanitizing vehicles when you have however many different people in them every day. The public transportation side, those are all things that we probably should have been doing along the way anyways, that are just kind of more important now. I think in the collector car world, the event side for sure, figuring out a lot of those protocols and again, things that probably should have been being done along the way, but still how to enjoy the cars. And, again, I think that we are really kind of getting back to a little bit of bygone era as well. We're seeing the resurgence of drive-in movie theaters, right? Because again, it's something people can go out and enjoy. They're in their own cars. The idea of going out on a family road trip or a Sunday drive just to get out of the house. All of this has kind of taken us back to a little bit of a bygone era. And there's still a lot to figure out, but I think we're gonna see a huge impact on the auto shows. We're already seeing that with Geneva has canceled for 2021 and has announced their financial troubles as well. I'm hoping that that's not the onset of a domino effect for others, but it's very likely we'll see that. And we'll see what car events are able to resurface from this. Hopefully there's not too many that we lose.
Jordan?
I don't think we go back to normal. I think this is a significant paradigm shift. I think this is similar to comparing pre-1929 to post-1929. When we look back almost 100 years on those 2 decades, we think of them very differently. And I think that's how we'll see the 2010s versus the 2020s. We don't know what the new normal is going to be, but it's not going to be like it was a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with Jordan in that regard. I do think we'll get back to some semblance of what was normal, but it's going to take a vaccine that really works for everybody before we get there. And that's not going to happen this year, hopefully next year. But even though we'll get back to some sort of normal, as we talked about before, the businesses that I talked to, companies in the industry, I talked to one supplier executive who said, I've cut my travel budget 80% this year. And he says, we'll put some of it back next year. He says, but we're not going back to the way we were before. Toyota said that they've cut their travel budget 90%. And Akio Toyoda, the CEO of the company, said, this whole COVID thing has opened my eyes to new ways of doing business. And Toyota is offering their employees maybe the ability to work from home permanently. Ford Motor Company has told most of its white-collar staff, they're probably not coming back this year. They're going to be working from home. I interviewed 2 different designers, Ralph Gilles, who runs Fiat Chrysler Automobiles Design, and Tom Kearns, who runs Kia Motors America Design. Both of them individually in separate interviews told me, you know what? My designers are turning in the best work they've ever turned in before. And I said, why is that? And they said, well, I guess, they're at home. There's no distractions. They got their earbuds in. They're jamming to their music. Their dog or their cat is there. And they're just putting everything, heart and soul, into their work in a way that they weren't able to do in the office. And so to Jordan's point, we're not going to go back to the old way of doing things. This is going to be a pivotal moment in human societal development.
Yeah, changing how we interact and how we move around, for sure.
Just like we're doing right now, all on Zoom.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much, John, Jordan, Tabetha, for joining us today. Got a nice wide-ranging conversation, touched on so many different things. You guys definitely made it worthwhile. So we'll have to touch base in the future coming up here and see how some of our predictions wound up.